The flight simulator compound buzzed with energy at 0600 hours, glass doors rattling as pilots streamed in for what everyone knew would be the most important training session of their careers. Quinn Rodriguez stood near the coffee dispenser, her flight suit zipped to the collar, watching names scroll across the main briefing screen in bright white text. Her stomach dropped as she scanned the list once, then twice. Her name wasn't there. Just 3 weeks ago, she'd been listed as sim support for the Canyon Loop program, the elite maneuver training that separated real pilots from the wannabes. Now, nothing. Like she'd never existed. Commander Jake Morrison stepped to the front of the room, his presence commanding instant silence. At 45, Morrison was everything Quinn wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of natural authority that made junior officers straighten their spines. He'd been running the Canyon Loop program for 2 years, hand-picking pilots he deemed worthy of the most challenging aerial maneuver in their arsenal. "Listen up," Morrison's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Canyon Loop isn't just another training exercise. It's the difference between life and death when enemy drones breach our defense grid. One shot, one chance, and if you can't hold 9.0 G minimum through the pressure corridor, you're useless to me." Quinn's jaw tightened. She'd helped design that corridor, spent countless nights fine-tuning the simulation parameters to match real-world physics. Every thermal draft, every pressure variance in the virtual canyon, she'd mapped it all. Across the room, Marcus Williams lifted a protein shake and smirked at his wingman. "Shouldn't be too hard," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people just aren't built for the big leagues." His eyes found Quinn's for a split second, and she saw the dismissal there. The same look she'd been getting for months, ever since she'd quietly outperformed half the squadron in individual training runs. Rachel Torres, Morrison's second-in-command, stood beside the projection screen reviewing pilot assignments. Quinn had submitted her formal request to join the Canyon Loop program 6 weeks ago, along with her training records and simulation scores. Rachel had promised to review it personally. That promise had apparently meant nothing. "Rodriguez," Morrison's voice cut through her thoughts. The room fell silent. "You're on observation duty. Ridge Station 4. Eyes only. No headset." The dismissal in his voice was unmistakable. Around the room she felt the weight of 30 pairs of eyes, some sympathetic, most indifferent, a few openly amused. This wasn't just about being excluded from the program. This was about being publicly diminished in front of everyone who mattered. "Sir," Quinn kept her voice steady, professional, "I'd like to request reconsideration for active participation. My sim scores—" "Your sim scores don't mean jack when you can't handle real pressure," Morrison cut her off. "This program is for pilots who can deliver when it counts, not support staff who think they understand combat flying." The words hit like a physical blow. Support staff, in front of everyone. Quinn felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago that showing emotion in front of Morrison only made things worse. "Understood, sir." As pilots began filing out to their briefing stations, Quinn caught sight of Alex Kim near the exit. Alex had been one of the few pilots who'd actually asked for her input on Canyon Loop tactics during informal conversations. Now he wouldn't meet her eyes. The message was clear. Association with Quinn Rodriguez wasn't career-enhancing. Standing alone as the briefing room emptied, Quinn felt the familiar weight of isolation settle on her shoulders. She'd been fighting this battle for 3 years, proving herself over and over, only to watch opportunities slip away because she didn't fit Morrison's image of what a fighter pilot should look like. But as she walked toward Ridge Station 4, Quinn made herself a promise. If Morrison wanted to keep her on the sidelines, fine. She'd watch from the observer's tent, and she'd learn every mistake, every failure, every moment when his hand-picked pilots proved they weren't as ready as he thought. Because Quinn Rodriguez had a secret that Morrison didn't know about. For the past 6 weeks, she'd been running unauthorized Canyon Loop simulations every morning before dawn. No supervision, no official record, just her and the simulator testing. The absolute limits of what the human body could endure. And she'd found something Morrison's Golden Boys hadn't. The Canyon Loop wasn't just about raw talent or natural ability. It was about understanding the precise moment when physics, physiology, and determination converged into something that looked impossible, but was actually inevitable. Morrison thought he was teaching her a lesson by putting her on observation duty. He had no idea he was giving her the perfect position to watch his entire program fall apart. The observation tent at Ridge Station 4 felt like exile disguised as duty. Quinn sat in the back row of folding chairs, clipboard balanced on her knee, watching Morrison's chosen pilots prepare for their first canyon loop attempts through the wide viewport. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training valley where dreams would either take flight or crash. Through her binoculars, she could see Marcus Williams in Viper 2, his F-16 gleaming on the launch pad. Marcus had been Morrison's first selection for the program, the commander's golden boy with perfect scores on standard maneuvers and an ego to match his talent. At least, his talent for everything except the canyon loop. Quinn knew something. Morrison didn't. Marcus had never successfully completed a canyon loop simulation at the required 9.0 G minimum. She'd seen his training records during her time as sim support. His highest recorded G-force hold was 8.7, and that had lasted barely 3 seconds before he'd pulled out, claiming equipment malfunction. "Viper 2, you are cleared for canyon loop. Approach!" the radio crackled. Quinn watched Marcus's F-16 accelerate into the entry corridor, diving toward the canyon at what looked like textbook speed and angle. Through the observer radio, the one frequency Morrison couldn't cut her from, she tracked his progress. "Entry speed optimal," called the flight controller. "Approaching compression zone." Quinn held her breath. This was the moment of truth. The canyon loop required a pilot to endure crushing G-forces while maintaining precise control through a series of rapid direction changes. Most pilots blacked out. The best ones fought through the grayout and managed to stay conscious. Only a handful could maintain target lock while their bodies tried to shut down. "G-force at 8.9 and climbing," the controller reported. "Target acquisition in 5 seconds. "Come on, Marcus," Quinn thought despite herself. "Prove me wrong." 9.1, 9.2, losing altitude. Viper 2, adjust your angle. Through her binoculars, Quinn saw Marcus's F-16 begin to wobble. The smooth entry had become erratic, the pilot fighting against forces his body couldn't handle. "I'm pulling out," Marcus's strained voice came over the radio. "Can't maintain." "Lock!" His F-16 peeled away from the canyon corridor, climbing to safe altitude as the simulation logged another failure. In the command tent below, Quinn could imagine Morrison's jaw tightening with frustration. 2 more pilots followed. Rachel Torres in Eagle 1 managed to hold 9.0 G for exactly 4 seconds before her vision grayed out. Tommy Chen in Falcon 3 never even reached the minimum threshold, pulling out at 8.6 G with what he claimed was equipment trouble. By midday, Morrison had watched his entire first wave of hand-picked pilots fail to complete a single canyon loop. Quinn made careful notes on each attempt, documenting the exact moments when technique fell apart, when physiology overcame training, when pride met the immutable laws of physics and lost. "Rodriguez," she looked up to find Morrison standing at the tent entrance, his expression darker than the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Behind him stood Rachel Torres, clipboard in hand, and disappointment written across her face. "Sir," Morrison stepped inside, letting the tent flap fall closed behind him. In the confined space, his presence felt overwhelming, a storm system about to break. "I want to know what you see out there," he said, his voice deceptively calm. 3 of my best pilots just failed a maneuver that's supposed to be routine. You're the simulation expert. What's your assessment?" Quinn felt the trap closing around her. This wasn't a request for her professional opinion. It was a test. Say the wrong thing, and she'd be transferred out of the program entirely. But staying silent felt like betrayal of everything she'd learned in her unauthorized training sessions. "They're approaching the pressure corridor too aggressively," she said carefully. "The canyon loop isn't about raw force. It's about timing and breath control. They're fighting the G-force instead of working with it." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Working with 9.0 G? That's not how physics works, Rodriguez. You either can handle the pressure or you can't." With respect, sir, that's not entirely accurate. The human body can adapt to extreme G-forces if the pilot understands how to regulate breathing and muscle tension during the hold. It's not about strength, it's about technique. Rachel Torres stepped forward, her voice sharp with skepticism. And where exactly did you learn this technique? Your simulator time logs show basic maneuver practice, nothing advanced. Quinn felt her heart rate spike. They were probing, looking for evidence of her unauthorized training, but she also sensed something else. Desperation. Morrison needed the Canyon Loop program to succeed, and his carefully selected pilots were failing spectacularly. I've been studying the physiological aspects of high-G maneuvers, she said, which was technically true. There are documented techniques from test pilots who've successfully managed extreme pressure scenarios. Morrison studied her for a long moment, and Quinn felt like prey being evaluated by a predator. Finally, he spoke. Fine. You think you understand the canyon loop better than my pilots? Tomorrow morning you'll be in the simulator with Marcus. Show him these magical techniques of yours. And Rodriguez? His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. If this is some kind of game to make my program look bad, I'll make sure you never fly anything more advanced than a cargo transport. Are we clear? Quinn met his gaze steadily. Crystal clear, sir. As Morrison and Rachel left the tent, Quinn felt a mixture of fear and anticipation course through her veins. She'd just been handed exactly what she'd wanted, a chance to prove herself, but she'd also painted a target on her back. Morrison wasn't the kind of commander who tolerated being shown up by someone he considered beneath his notice. That evening, alone in her quarters, Quinn pulled out her personal notebook filled with detailed analyses of canyon loop physics and physiology. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, even if she hadn't known exactly how it would arrive. Tomorrow, she'd step into the simulator with Marcus Williams watching. She'd either validate everything she'd learned in her secret training sessions, or she'd provide Morrison with all the ammunition he needed to destroy her career. But as she reviewed her notes one final time, Quinn felt a calm certainty settle in her chest. She knew something Morrison's pilots didn't. She knew the canyon loop could be beaten, and tomorrow she was going to prove it. The simulator bay at 0530 hours felt like a coliseum before gladiators entered the arena. Quinn arrived to find Marcus Williams already there, leaning against simulator pod 6 with his arms crossed and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Commander Morrison stood nearby, coffee cup in hand, watching with the predatory attention of someone expecting entertainment. Let's get this over with, Marcus said without preamble. I've got real training to do today. Quinn ignored the dismissal and moved to the simulator console. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, loading the canyon loop parameters she knew better than her own heartbeat. Behind her, she felt Morrison's presence like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. Rodriguez, Morrison's voice carried a warning edge. I want to be clear about something. You're here to assist Williams, not show off. This is about improving his technique, not proving some point about your simulation theories. Understood, sir. Quinn's voice remained steady, but inside, her pulse quickened. She could feel the trap being set. Morrison wanted her to fail publicly, to demonstrate that all her theoretical knowledge meant nothing in the face of real pressure. Marcus climbed into the simulator pod, his movements betraying more nervousness than he'd ever admit. Through the viewing window, Quinn could see him adjusting his harness with sharp, agitated movements. Walk me through your approach, Quinn said over the comm system. Approach? I hit the entry corridor at optimal speed, dive into the canyon, and hold maximum G through the target acquisition zone. Simple. Quinn winced. It was exactly what she'd expected. The brutally straightforward approach that had failed every pilot so far. Marcus, what's your breathing technique during the high G phase? A pause. Breathing technique? How do you manage oxygen intake when your lungs are being compressed at 9.0 G? Another pause. Longer this time. Morrison stepped closer to the console, his expression sharpening with interest. I hold my breath and push through, Marcus finally answered. Quinn closed her eyes briefly. That's your problem. You're fighting the physics instead of working with them. Can we run a practice sequence at 7.0 G first? I don't need practice runs, Marcus snapped. Let's just do this. Morrison leaned over Quinn's shoulder, his voice low and threatening. Give him what he wants, Rodriguez. Full canyon loop, no. Training wheels! Quinn's finger hovered over the execution button. Every instinct told her this was a mistake. Marcus wasn't ready, hadn't learned the breathing techniques or pressure management strategies that made the canyon loop survivable, but Morrison's order left no room for argument. Initiating canyon. Loop sequence, she announced. The simulator roared to life. Through the external monitors, Quinn watched Marcus's F-16 dive into the virtual canyon at maximum thrust. His entry speed was perfect, angle textbook precise. For the first 10 seconds, everything looked flawless. Then the G-forces began building. 8.5 and climbing, Quinn reported, watching Marcus's vital signs spike on her secondary monitor. His heart rate was already approaching dangerous levels. 8.8, 8.9. Through the pod's viewing window, she could see Marcus's face contorting with strain. His breathing had become rapid and shallow, exactly the opposite of what he needed to survive the next phase. 9.0 and holding, Quinn called out, but even as she said it, she could see the telemetry beginning to fluctuate. Marcus was fighting, the pressure with pure muscular tension burning through his oxygen reserves and pushing his cardiovascular system toward failure. Target acquisition in 3 seconds, Morrison announced, his voice tight with anticipation. Quinn watched the targeting display begin to flicker. Marcus's hands were shaking on the controls, his vision graying out as blood flow to his brain decreased under the crushing G-forces. I can't hold it, Marcus gasped over the comm. Hold the line, Williams, Morrison barked. Push through. But Quinn could see it was already over. Marcus's vital signs were entering the red zone, his aircraft control degrading rapidly. In another few seconds, he'd either black out completely or suffer what pilots euphemistically called a rapid, unplanned separation from consciousness. Aborting sequence, Quinn announced, her hand slamming down on the emergency stop button. The simulator pod's emergency systems activated, rapidly reducing G-force and bringing Marcus back to safe parameters. Through the viewing window, Quinn could see him slumped in his harness, gasping for air like a drowning man breaking the surface. Morrison's coffee cup hit the floor with a ceramic crash that echoed through the sudden silence. What the hell was that? Morrison's voice carried a dangerous edge that made every technician in the bay stop what they were doing. Quinn turned to face him, her own composure hanging by a thread. That was exactly what I expected to happen. Marcus isn't trained for canyon loop physiology. None of your pilots are. My pilots? Morrison stepped closer, and Quinn could smell coffee and barely controlled rage on his breath. These are the best stick and rudder pilots on this base. If they can't handle the canyon loop, then nobody can. That's not true, sir. The words left Quinn's mouth before she could stop them. The silence that followed felt like the moment, before lightning strikes. Morrison's face had gone pale, then flushed red with fury. Are you suggesting, he said with deadly quiet, that you could do better than my hand-picked pilots? Quinn felt the world narrow to this single moment, this one choice that would define everything that came next. She could back down, apologize, accept her place on the sidelines, or she could tell the truth that had been burning inside her for months. Yes, sir, I am. Morrison's laugh was sharp and humorless. Is that right? Well then, Rodriguez, it looks like we need to settle this once and for all. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours, you'll get your chance to prove that all your theories are worth something. Canyon loop, full parameters, official record. Quinn felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Sir? You heard me. One shot, Rodriguez. You either complete the canyon loop successfully, or you're transferred off this base by week's end. And not to another flight program, to a desk job where you can theorize about flying instead of pretending you can actually do it. Behind Morrison, Marcus Williams had climbed out of the simulator pod, his face still pale from the failed run. He looked at Quinn with something between sympathy and schadenfreude. Commander, Rachel Torres's voice cut through the tension as she entered the simulator bay. "Is this official?" Morrison turned to his second-in-command with cold certainty. "Make it official. Tomorrow morning, Rodriguez gets her shot at glory. Canyon Loop, full telemetry, recorded for the permanent file." As Morrison strode out of the bay, his footsteps echoing off the metal walls, Quinn felt the weight of what she'd just committed to settling on her shoulders. She'd pushed back against Morrison's dismissal, and now faced the ultimate test of everything she'd learned in her secret early morning training sessions. Rachel Torres approached Quinn, her expression unreadable. "You know he's setting you up to fail, right? This isn't about giving you a fair chance. It's about destroying your career in the most public way possible." Quinn nodded slowly. "I know." "Then why did you agree to it?" Quinn looked toward the simulator pod where she'd spent countless unauthorized hours perfecting techniques Morrison's pilots had never even heard of. Because some things are worth the risk. That night, alone in her quarters, Quinn spread her training notes across her desk for one final review. Tomorrow she'd either validate everything she believed about the Canyon Loop, or she'd watch her aviation career end in spectacular failure. But as she studied the precise breathing patterns and muscle control techniques that had taken her months to master, Quinn felt a strange sense of calm. Morrison thought he was giving her enough rope to hang herself. Instead, he'd given her exactly what she'd been training for all along, the chance to prove that quiet excellence could speak louder than politics, favoritism, and institutional prejudice combined. Tomorrow she'd step into that simulator pod and show everyone what happened when preparation met opportunity, and Commander Morrison was going to learn something about underestimating people he'd never bothered to really see. Quinn's alarm clock read 0400 when she silently slipped out of her quarters and made her way through the darkened corridors toward the simulator bay. She had 2 hours before Morrison's official test. 2 hours for one final practice run using techniques she'd spent months perfecting in secret. The hallways were empty, save for the occasional maintenance worker or security patrol who'd grown accustomed to her early morning presence. The simulator bay's keycard reader blinked green as she swiped her access card, the same card that should have been deactivated when Morrison removed her from active participation, but Lieutenant Diana Wells from IT had forgotten to process. The removal, a small act of rebellion from someone who'd watched Quinn's quiet competence be overlooked one too many times. Pod 6 hummed to life as Quinn settled into the familiar cockpit configuration. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, loading the Canyon Loop parameters she could probably run in her sleep. But this wasn't about familiar comfort. This was about pushing beyond everything she'd achieved before. For the past 6 weeks, Quinn had been systematically exploring the edges of human physiological capability. While Morrison's chosen pilots approached the Canyon Loop like a test of brute strength, she'd treated it like a complex equation with variables that could be optimized. Breathing pattern, not the rapid, shallow gasps that most pilots defaulted to under stress, but a controlled rhythm that maintained oxygen saturation even as G-forces compressed the lungs. She'd studied high-altitude mountaineering techniques, adapted them for the specific pressures of aerial combat maneuvering, muscle tension, not the full-body rigidity that pilots instinctively use to fight G-forces, but selective tension in specific muscle groups while keeping others relaxed. Too much tension burned oxygen and shortened endurance. Too little allowed blood pooling that led to blackouts. Mental focus. Instead of fighting the sensation of crushing pressure, she'd learned to compartmentalize her awareness. Part of her mind monitored the aircraft's systems and targeting displays, while another part regulated her body's responses to stress. "Initiating Canyon Loop sequence," she whispered to the empty bay. Her virtual F-16 dove into the simulated canyon with the same precision she'd practiced hundreds of times. Entry speed optimal, angle perfect, all systems green. As the G-forces began building, Quinn felt her body settle into the controlled state she'd trained herself to achieve. 8.5 G. Her breathing remained steady, deep inhalations followed by controlled exhalations that maintained blood pressure and oxygen flow. 9.0 G. The pressure tried to crush her into the seat, but she'd learned to work with it rather than against it. Selective muscle tension in her legs and core prevented blood pooling while keeping her arms and shoulders relaxed enough to maintain. Fine motor control, 9.3 G. This was where Morrison's pilots typically began losing control. Quinn felt the familiar weight pressing down on her chest, the grayness creeping in at the edges of her vision. But instead of panicking, she let her breathing rhythm guide her through the pressure wave, 9.6 G. The targeting display wavered but remained locked. Her virtual aircraft held its trajectory through the canyon's tightest turn, while Quinn's consciousness balanced on the knife's edge between control and collapse. Target acquired. Weapons release. Direct hit. Canyon loop complete. Quinn allowed herself a small smile as she powered down the simulator. She'd just completed a 9.6 G canyon loop, a full 0.6 G higher than Morrison's minimum requirement. More importantly, she'd maintained target lock and weapons accuracy throughout the entire sequence. That's impossible! Quinn spun around to find Alex Kim standing in the simulator bay entrance, his tablet computer displaying the telemetry from her run. His face showed the kind of shocked disbelief usually reserved for witnessing miracles or natural disasters. Alex, I can explain. You just held 9.6 G for 8 seconds, Alex interrupted, scrolling through the data on his tablet. That's not just higher than Morrison's requirement. That's higher than anything I've seen from active combat pilots. How long have you been training for this? Quinn felt her carefully constructed secrecy crumbling around her. Alex was one of the few pilots who treated her with genuine respect, but he was also ambitious enough to use this information to advance his own career. 6 weeks, she admitted, every morning before the official training sessions. Alex shook his head in amazement. Morrison has no idea, does he? He thinks you're some support staff trying to play pilot. That's exactly what he thinks. Jesus, Quinn! Alex sank into a nearby chair, his tablet forgotten in his hands. You realize what this means? You've cracked the canyon loop. Not just survived it, mastered it. Do you have any idea how many pilots have washed out trying to achieve what you just did? Quinn felt a mixture of pride and terror. Her secret was out, but Alex's reaction suggested something she hadn't fully considered: the political implications of her achievement. If she could demonstrate capabilities that Morrison's hand-picked pilots couldn't match, it would raise uncomfortable questions about the selection process. Alex, you can't tell anyone about this. Not yet. Why not? This is incredible. You should be leading the Canyon Loop program, not sitting in observation tents, because Morrison will find a way to discredit it. He'll claim equipment malfunction, or that I modified the simulation parameters, or that the telemetry was corrupted. He needs his pilots to succeed, and he can't allow someone he's publicly dismissed to show them up. Alex studied her with new understanding. So what's your plan for this morning? Quinn checked the wall clock, 0530 hours. Morrison's test was scheduled for 0600 and pilots would be arriving soon for what everyone expected to be a public humiliation. I'm going to complete the canyon loop exactly as Morrison specified. Full parameters, official record, witnessed by anyone who wants to watch. And then I'm going to let the data speak for itself. Alex was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, he spoke with the kind of careful precision that indicated serious thought. Quinn, there's something you should know. Morrison's under pressure from higher command. The Canyon Loop program was supposed to be operational 2 months ago, but his pilots keep failing the qualifications. Word is that if he can't produce results soon, they'll replace him with someone who can. Quinn felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Morrison's increasing desperation, his need to publicly humiliate anyone who questioned his methods, his determination to protect his chosen pilots from criticism, it all made sense if his own career was on the line. That's why this test isn't really about me, she realized. It's about proving that the canyon loop is impossible to master, so his failures aren't really failures. Alex nodded grimly. If you complete the canyon loop this morning, it won't just embarrass Morrison. It'll prove that his training methods are fundamentally flawed. The weight of that realization settled on Quinn's shoulders. She'd thought this, Test was about her career, her chance to prove herself worthy of respect and recognition. But she was actually stepping into a much larger conflict, one where institutional politics and personal ambition had created a situation that demanded truth, regardless of who got hurt in the process. "Alex," she said quietly, "when this is over, Morrison's going to try to destroy me. He'll claim fraud, equipment tampering, anything to invalidate what happens in that simulator. Probably. Will you back me up? Will you verify that what happens is legitimate?" Alex looked at his tablet, still displaying the impossible telemetry from Quinn's unauthorized run. When he looked up, his expression had hardened with resolve. "Yeah, I will. Because pilots like you are why I wanted to fly in, the first place. And watching Morrison turn this program into his personal ego trip has been making me sick." As they spoke, the sound of approaching voices echoed through the corridor outside the simulator bay. Morrison's test audience was beginning to arrive, and Quinn felt her stomach tighten with nervous energy. In 30 minutes, she'd climb into Simulator Pod 6 with a room full of witnesses, expecting to watch her fail. Morrison would be there, along with Rachel Torres and probably half the base's pilot community. They'd all be waiting to see the support staff member who'd gotten too big for her britches finally put in her place. Instead, they were going to witness something that would change everything. The simulator bay had transformed into an impromptu amphitheater by 0555 hours. Word had spread through the base faster than Quinn had expected. The support staff member who'd challenged Commander Morrison was about to get her comeuppance in front of anyone brave enough to watch. Pilots clustered around the observation windows, their expressions ranging from curious to openly entertained. Quinn stood beside Simulator Pod 6, methodically checking her flight suit and equipment while trying to ignore the whispered conversations surrounding her. She could feel the weight of expectations, most of them negative. To the assembled crowd, she represented an object lesson about knowing your place in the military hierarchy. Commander Morrison entered the bay at exactly 0600, his presence immediately commanding attention from the gathered observers. Behind him walked Rachel Torres carrying an official recording device, and Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes from Base Operations, someone important enough to lend official weight to whatever was about to happen. "Rodriguez," Morrison's voice, carried across the bay with military precision. "Are you ready to demonstrate these theories of yours?" Quinn met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir." Morrison gestured toward the simulator pod with theatrical flourish. "Then let's see what all your studying has accomplished. Canyon loop, full parameters, minimum 9.0 G requirement for mission completion. The recording will be part of your permanent file." As Quinn climbed into the simulator pod, she caught sight of Alex Kim positioned near the telemetry console. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone in this room full of skeptics. The cockpit sealed around her with its familiar hydraulic hiss, and for a moment Quinn allowed herself to feel the calm that came with being in her element. Outside she could see faces pressed against the observation windows like spectators at an execution. But inside the pod there was only her, the controls, and the challenge she'd been preparing for her entire career. "Simulator systems online," announced the technician running the bay operations. "Canyon loop parameters loaded and verified. All telemetry recording to official channels." Morrison's voice came through the comm system with cold authority. "Rodriguez, you have one attempt. Complete the canyon loop with target acquisition, or consider your flight career terminated. Begin when ready." Quinn's hands moved across the startup sequence with practiced efficiency. Around her, the simulator bay faded into background noise as she entered the focused state she'd learned to achieve during her secret training sessions. Heart rate steady, breathing controlled, mind clear. Initiating canyon loop sequence, her virtual F-16 launched into the simulated sky with smooth acceleration. Through the external monitors, the assembled observers could see her aircraft diving toward the canyon entrance at optimal speed and angle. For the first few seconds, everything looked textbook perfect, exactly what they'd seen from every failed pilot before her. "Entry phase complete," Quinn reported over the comm. "Beginning compression sequence." This was where Marcus Williams and the others had started to fall apart. As G-forces began building beyond normal human tolerance, most pilots instinctively fought against the pressure with muscle tension and rapid breathing, techniques that burned oxygen and shortened endurance. Quinn did the opposite. 8.0 G and climbing, the technician announced. Vital signs stable. In the observation area, murmurs began rippling through the crowd. Quinn's physiological readings weren't showing the stress markers everyone expected. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled, her breathing steady rather than frantic. 8.5 G, 8.8 G. Through the simulator's external view, observers could see Quinn's virtual aircraft maintaining perfect trajectory through the canyon's initial turns. Inside the pod, Quinn felt the familiar weight of crushing pressure, but her months of preparation had taught her to work with the sensation rather than against it. 9.0 G achieved, the technician called out. Target acquisition zone in 15 seconds. Quinn's breathing remained controlled. Deep, measured inhalations followed by steady exhalations that maintained blood pressure despite the crushing forces trying to pool blood in her lower extremities. Her selective muscle tension technique kept her conscious while preserving the fine motor control needed for precision flying. Target lock acquired, she reported, her voice steady despite the enormous physical stress. Weapon systems armed. Morrison stepped closer to the telemetry console, his expression shifting from confident anticipation to growing confusion. The readings weren't matching what he'd expected to see from a failing pilot. 9.2 G, 9.3 G. The technician's voice had taken on a note of amazement. She's still climbing. Inside the pod, Quinn felt herself entering the zone she'd discovered during her secret training, the precise balance point where human physiology met technological capability. Her vision had narrowed to tunnel focus, but the targeting display remained clear and steady. 9.5 G and holding, she announced. Target acquisition complete. The simulation's target drone appeared on her heads-up display, exactly where her months of practice had taught her to expect it. With the same controlled precision she'd used for breathing and muscle tension, Quinn aligned her virtual weapons and achieved target lock. 9.6 G, the technician called out, his voice barely containing disbelief. Lock maintained. Duration, 8 seconds and counting. In the observation area, complete silence had replaced the earlier murmurs and whispered conversations. Pilots who'd come to watch Quinn fail were instead witnessing something none of them had ever seen. A perfect canyon loop execution at G-forces that exceeded official requirements. Weapons release, Quinn announced. Her virtual missiles streaked toward the target drone with flawless accuracy. Direct hit. Target destroyed. Canyon loop complete. As the simulation wound down and G-forces returned to normal levels, Quinn allowed herself a moment to appreciate what she'd just accomplished. Not just the successful completion of the canyon loop, but the validation of months of solitary preparation and self-directed training. Simulation complete, she announced over the comm. All parameters met. Target destroyed. The simulator pod opened with its characteristic hiss, and Quinn emerged to find the bay in stunned silence. 40-plus military personnel, pilots, technicians, support staff, and command officers stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to grudging respect. Morrison stood frozen beside the telemetry console, staring at readouts that contradicted everything he'd expected to see. The official recording showed a flawless canyon loop execution at 9.6 G, a full 0.6 G higher than his program's minimum requirement. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with unusual situations. Technician, I want that telemetry data verified immediately. Full diagnostic on all simulator systems. Ma'am, all systems show normal operation, the technician replied. Telemetry is clean and verified. The recording shows a successful canyon loop completion at 9.6 G sustained load. Hayes turned to Morrison with an expression that suggested serious questions were about to be asked. Commander, how long has Rodriguez been training for canyon? Loop qualification? Morrison's jaw worked silently for several seconds before he managed to speak. She hasn't been training. She was removed from the program for lack of aptitude. Lack of aptitude? Hayes's voice carried a dangerous edge. Commander, I just watched someone complete your supposedly impossible maneuver at G-forces that exceed your own requirements. Either your selection criteria are fundamentally flawed, or you've been preventing qualified personnel from participating in essential training. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Morrison struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't end his career. Around the observation area, pilots exchanged meaningful glances. Everyone present understood they'd just witnessed something that would have consequences far beyond this single test. Alex Kim stepped forward from his position near the telemetry console. "Ma'am, if I may?" He waited for Hayes's nod before continuing. "Rodriguez has been conducting independent study of canyon loop physiology for weeks. Her approach to G-force management is completely different from standard pilot training." Hayes turned to Quinn with sharp attention. "Is that accurate, Rodriguez?" Quinn felt every eye in the room focused on her. This was the moment when she could either retreat into safe humility or claim the recognition her achievement deserved. "Yes, ma'am, I've been studying high-G maneuvering techniques and developing new approaches to pressure management." The canyon loop isn't just about flying skill. It's about understanding how the human body can adapt to extreme conditions. Morrison finally found his voice, though it carried a note of desperation. "Ma'am, I don't know how she achieved those results, but the Canyon Loop program has specific requirements for pilot selection. Rodriguez lacks the experience and qualifications necessary for combat maneuvering. She just completed your combat maneuver at forces that none of your qualified pilots could handle," Hayes replied coldly. "Commander Morrison, I want a full review of your selection criteria and training methods, and I want Rodriguez's techniques evaluated for program-wide implementation." The words hit Morrison like physical blows. Quinn could see his carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time. The program he'd designed to showcase his hand-picked pilots had instead demonstrated their inadequacy while elevating someone he'd dismissed as unworthy. "Rodriguez," Hayes continued, "report to my office at 1400 hours. I want a detailed brief on your training methods and physiological research. This could revolutionize how we approach high-G combat training." As the crowd began to disperse, Quinn found herself surrounded by pilots who'd ignored her for months. Marcus Williams approached with grudging respect, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. "How?" he asked simply. "How did you do what I couldn't?" Quinn looked at the pilot who'd dismissed her capabilities just days earlier. "You were fighting the G-forces. I learned to work with them. It's not about being stronger, it's about being smarter." Marcus nodded slowly, processing the implication that his failures weren't about inadequate talent, but inadequate technique. Would you be willing to show me the breathing methods you used?" Before Quinn could answer, Morrison's voice cut across the bay with barely controlled fury. "Rodriguez! My office! Now!" Commander Morrison's office felt like a tribunal chamber as Quinn stood at attention before his desk. The walls, lined with commendations and photographs from Morrison's 20-year career, seemed to close in around her. Behind his desk, Morrison sat rigid with fury, his knuckles white as he gripped a printout of her Canyon Loop telemetry. "Sit down," he said without looking up. Quinn remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." Morrison's eyes snapped up, blazing with the kind of rage that ends careers. "That wasn't a request, Rodriguez. It was an order." "With respect, sir, I'm not currently under disciplinary action, so I have the right to stand during informal discussions." The technicality hit Morrison like a slap. Quinn could see his jaw muscles working as he processed the fact that she was no longer the compliant support staff member he could intimidate with casual authority. "Fine." Morrison stood as well, using his height advantage to loom over her. "Let's discuss what happened in that simulator, because I know what I saw doesn't add up." Quinn kept her expression neutral. "What exactly doesn't add up, sir?" "You expect me to believe that someone with your limited flight experience just happened to master a maneuver that has defeated some of the best pilots on this base? That you independently develop techniques that surpass our official training protocols?" "Yes, sir, that's exactly what happened." Morrison's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "Rodriguez, I've been running flight programs for 15 years. I know talent when I see it, and I know when someone is running a game. You did something to that simulator, modified the parameters, hacked the G-force calculations, something. Quinn felt a flash of anger but kept her voice level. Sir, the telemetry was recorded in real time with Lieutenant Colonel Hayes present. The simulator underwent full diagnostics both before and after my run. Every system checked out normal. Then explain to me how someone I removed from the program for inadequate performance suddenly becomes an expert in advanced aerial combat. Because you never actually evaluated my performance, Quinn replied, her patience finally fraying. You looked at my personnel file, saw support staff instead of pilot, and made assumptions. You never bothered to review my flight records or capabilities. Morrison's face flushed red. I've been selecting pilots since before you even joined the military. I know what it takes to succeed in high-pressure situations. Do you? Quinn's voice remained calm, but steel had entered her tone. Because your hand-picked pilots have a 0% success rate on the Canyon Loop, maybe your selection criteria need revision. The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down between them. Morrison stepped around his desk, closing the distance until he was uncomfortably close. Listen carefully, Rodriguez. I don't know how you pulled off that stunt today, but I know it wasn't legitimate, and I'm going to prove it. I'm ordering a full investigation into your simulator access, your training records, and your background. When I find evidence of fraud, and I will find it, you'll be facing court-martial for falsifying official records. Quinn met his gaze without flinching. Sir, you're welcome to investigate anything you'd like. You'll find that I've been conducting authorized research into high-G physiology using approved simulator time during off-duty hours. Everything I've done has been within regulations. Authorized by whom? Base Regulation 347-12 permits off-duty use of training simulators for research purposes with appropriate safety protocols. I filed the proper paperwork 6 weeks ago. Morrison's confidence wavered slightly. What paperwork? Quinn reached into her jacket and produced a folded document. My research proposal, approved by Lieutenant Torres and filed with base operations. I've been documenting everything, training sessions, physiological data, technique development. It's all properly recorded. Morrison snatched the document and scanned it rapidly. Quinn could see his growing dismay as he realized she'd covered every regulatory requirement. She'd been conducting legitimate research under existing protocols, not unauthorized experimentation. This doesn't change anything, Morrison said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier venom. Research is one thing. Practical application in a combat scenario is something entirely different. Which is why Lieutenant Colonel Hayes wants me to brief her on potential program implementation, Quinn replied. Sir, the Canyon Loop has a strategic purpose. If my techniques can improve pilot survival and mission success rates, shouldn't that take priority over personal opinions about who deserves to fly? Morrison's expression hardened again. Don't lecture me about strategic priorities, Rodriguez. I've been protecting this base and its mission since you were learning to tie your shoes. Then protect it now, Quinn said quietly. Let the techniques speak for themselves. Test them with other pilots. If they work, implement them. If they don't, discard them. But don't sacrifice military effectiveness because you're embarrassed about being wrong. The accusation of embarrassment hit Morrison like a physical blow. His face went pale, then flushed red again as he struggled with the implications of Quinn's words. Wrong? He said, his voice dangerously low. You think I'm wrong about pilot selection? I think your criteria prioritize political connections and personal preferences over actual capability, Quinn replied. Marcus Williams got selected because he fits your image of what a fighter pilot should look like. I got excluded for the same reason. But the Canyon Loop doesn't care about images. It only cares about results. Morrison stepped back, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. You have no idea what you're talking about. Williams is one of the most naturally gifted pilots I've ever seen. Then why couldn't he complete the Canyon Loop? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Morrison stared at Quinn with the expression of a man watching his carefully constructed worldview collapse in real time. Get out, he said finally. Get out of my office before I do something we'll both regret." Quinn remained in place. "Sir, I have one more thing to say." "I said get out." "This isn't about me versus your pilots," Quinn continued, her voice steady despite Morrison's rage. "This is about finding the best possible ways to keep people alive in combat situations. If you can set aside your ego long enough to consider that possibility, maybe we can accomplish something important here." Morrison's hand moved toward his phone, probably to call security, but then he stopped, his expression shifting from fury to something approaching uncertainty. Even if your techniques are legitimate," he said slowly, "you've made me look like a fool in front of Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and half the pilot community. You think I'm just going to forget that?" Quinn felt a moment of sympathy for the man, whose career she'd just potentially destroyed, but the sympathy was quickly overwhelmed by the memory of months of dismissal, condescension, and systematic exclusion from opportunities she'd earned. "Sir, I never wanted to make you look foolish. I just wanted to fly." Morrison studied her face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "And now you're going to get that chance, aren't you? Hayes is going to fast-track you into the program, probably promote you, maybe even put you in charge of developing new training protocols. I don't know what Lieutenant Colonel Hayes plans to do." "I do," Morrison said bitterly. "I've seen this before. Someone makes the establishment look bad, and suddenly they become the golden child. 6 months from now, you'll be the poster girl for innovation in pilot training, and I'll be the dinosaur who couldn't recognize talent." Quinn remained silent. There was truth in Morrison's prediction, and they both knew it. "Well, congratulations. Rodriguez, you got what you wanted. Just remember, the military is a small community. Reputations follow you wherever you go. And after today, everyone will know exactly how you achieved your success." The threat was clear, but Quinn felt oddly calm. "Let them know, sir. Let them know that I spent months researching, training, and preparing, while others relied on politics and connections. Let them know that I earned my place through competence rather than favoritism." Morrison's laugh was hollow. "You really think it's going to be that simple? You think proving your point today solves everything?" "No, sir. I think it's just the beginning." As Quinn turned to leave Morrison's office, she heard him speak one final time, his voice carrying a note of grudging respect, mixed with resentment. "Rodriguez? For what it's worth, that was some impressive flying today." Quinn paused at the door. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. You have no idea what you've just set in motion." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes's office at 1400 hours felt like stepping into a different world from Morrison's cramped, ego-laden space. The walls displayed charts of pilot performance metrics, training efficiency data, and strategic planning documents that spoke to someone who viewed aviation through the lens of systemic improvement rather than personal glory. Hayes gestured for Quinn to sit across from her desk, then activated a recording device with practiced efficiency. "Rodriguez, let's start with the basics. Walk me through exactly how you developed your canyon loop techniques." Over the next hour, Quinn detailed her research methodology, the physiological studies she'd conducted, the breathing techniques adapted from high-altitude climbing, the muscle control strategies that allowed selective tension management during extreme G-forces. Hayes took notes continuously, occasionally asking sharp questions that demonstrated genuine understanding of both the technical challenges and broader implications. "This is remarkable work," Hayes said when Quinn finished. "Have you documented these techniques in a format that could be taught to other pilots?" "Yes, ma'am. I have detailed training protocols, physiological monitoring guidelines, and progression schedules for building G-force tolerance safely." Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Quinn with calculating eyes. "Rodriguez, I'm going to be direct with you. What happened in that simulator today has created a significant problem." Quinn felt her stomach tighten. "Ma'am?" "Commander Morrison's Canyon Loop program was supposed to be operational 8 weeks ago. His repeated failures to produce qualified pilots have raised questions at the highest levels about our combat readiness. Your demonstration today proves that the Canyon Loop can be mastered, which means Morrison's failures aren't due to impossible requirements. They're due to inadequate training methods." The implications hit Quinn like cold water. Her success hadn't just embarrassed Morrison personally, it had revealed systematic deficiencies that could affect his career and the entire program's future. "Ma'am, I never intended to create problems for Commander Morrison or the program." "Intentions don't matter now," Hayes replied. "Results do. And the result is that I have to explain to General Crawford why one unauthorized researcher accomplished what an entire official program couldn't achieve." Quinn remained silent, sensing that Hayes was working through larger strategic considerations. "Here's what's going to happen," Hayes continued. "I'm recommending you for immediate transfer to the Advanced Combat Training Division. You'll lead a team to develop and implement your canyon loop techniques across all relevant pilot programs. This will come with a promotion to captain and formal recognition for your contributions to combat aviation." Quinn felt a mixture of elation and apprehension. Everything she'd worked toward was being offered to her, but she could sense complications beneath the surface. "Ma'am, what about Commander Morrison and the existing program?" Hayes's expression hardened slightly. "Morrison will be reassigned to administrative duties pending a review of his selection criteria and training methodologies. The Canyon Loop program will be restructured under new leadership, specifically your leadership." The words should have felt like victory, but Quinn found herself thinking about the pilots who'd struggled under Morrison's program. Marcus Williams, Rachel Torres, even the cocky flyboys who'd dismissed her. They'd failed, not because they lacked ability, but because they'd been taught inadequate techniques. "Ma'am, request permission to speak freely." "Granted." "Morrison's pilots aren't failures. They're capable aviators who were given incomplete training. If we're restructuring the program, I'd like to request that we give them another chance, using the new techniques, starting fresh, without the baggage of previous failures." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "That's unusually generous, considering how they've treated you." Quinn thought about Marcus Williams' request to learn her breathing methods, about the grudging respect she'd seen in pilots who'd previously ignored her existence. "Ma'am, this isn't about personal vindication. It's about having the best possible pilots defending our airspace. If Marcus Williams can learn to complete the Canyon Loop at 9.5 G, he becomes a better combat pilot. That serves everyone's interests." Hayes studied Quinn for a long moment. "You realize that giving Morrison's pilots another chance also gives them an opportunity to potentially overshadow your achievements? If Williams masters your techniques and then exceeds your performance, the credit for innovation could shift to him." Quinn had considered that possibility. In the military's competitive environment, success was often attributed to whoever held the spotlight longest, rather than who did the foundational work. "Ma'am, if Marcus Williams uses my techniques to become a better pilot and protect lives in combat, then the program succeeded. That's what matters." "Spoken like someone who's never dealt with military politics," Hayes said with what might have been approval. "Rodriguez, your technical skills are impressive, but your attitude about shared success is either admirably naive or strategically brilliant. I'm not sure which." Before Quinn could respond, Hayes's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the display and frowned. "It's General Crawford. He wants to discuss the Canyon Loop situation immediately." Hayes looked at Quinn with an expression that mixed opportunity and warning. This conversation just became much bigger than either of us anticipated. As Hayes reached for the phone, Quinn realized she was about to move beyond base-level politics, into the realm where military strategy intersected with institutional power. Her success in the simulator had started as a personal quest for recognition, but it was rapidly becoming something that could affect combat aviation training across the entire military. The phone call lasted 15 minutes, with Hayes mostly listening and occasionally providing brief affirmations. Quinn could hear General Crawford's voice through the handset, authoritative, demanding specifics about Quinn's techniques and their potential for broader implementation. When Hayes finally hung up, her expression had shifted to something approaching excitement mixed with bureaucratic caution. "Rodriguez, General Crawford wants to see your techniques demonstrated at the Pentagon. We're talking about potential adoption across all branches of military aviation. This could revolutionize how we train pilots for high-stress combat scenarios." Quinn felt the magnitude of the moment settling around her. 6 months ago, she'd been simulation support staff, watching other people receive opportunities she'd earned. Now she was being invited to present her innovations to the highest levels of military leadership. Ma'am, when would this presentation take place? Next week, you'll brief the Joint Chiefs Aviation Committee on your methodology, demonstrate the techniques with volunteer pilots, and provide detailed implementation recommendations. The timeline was aggressive, but Quinn felt ready. She'd been preparing for this opportunity her entire career, even when she hadn't known exactly what form it would take. "I'll be ready, ma'am." Hayes smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Rodriguez, 6 hours ago you were observation staff watching other people fly. Now you're about to brief 4-star generals on revolutionary aviation techniques. How does that feel?" Quinn considered the question carefully. "Like the beginning of something important, ma'am." "Good answer, because that's exactly what this is." 3 weeks later, Quinn stood in the same simulator bay where her career had almost ended, watching Marcus Williams emerge from Pod 6 with a grin that could have powered the entire base. The telemetry display showed what everyone in the room already knew. Canyon loop complete, 9.4 G sustained, target destroyed. "Outstanding work, Marcus," Quinn said as he pulled off his helmet. "Your breathing technique during the final compression was textbook perfect." Marcus shook his head in amazement. 6 weeks ago, I couldn't hold 8.7 G for more than 3 seconds. Now I'm completing full canyon loops at forces I never thought possible. Your program is revolutionary, Captain Rodriguez." The promotion still felt surreal. Captain Quinn Rodriguez, Director of Advanced G-Force Training, United States Air Force. Her office was 3 doors down from where Commander Morrison used to work before his reassignment to logistics coordination at a desk job in Colorado. "It's not my program," Quinn corrected. "It's our program. Every pilot who masters these techniques adds to our understanding of human potential under extreme stress." Through the observation window, she could see Lieutenant Colonel Hayes reviewing training statistics with Alex Kim, who'd been promoted to Deputy Director of the program. The numbers told a story that would have seemed impossible 2 months ago. 97% canyon loop completion rate among pilots trained with Quinn's techniques, with average G-force tolerance increased by 1.2 G across all participants. Rachel Torres approached from the scheduling console, tablet in hand and expression focused. "Captain, we've got confirmation from Washington. The Joint Chiefs approved full implementation across all combat aviation programs. They want our training. Protocols deployed to every fighter squadron within 6 months." Quinn felt a mixture of pride and responsibility settling on her shoulders. What had started as her personal quest to prove herself worthy had become a systematic revolution in pilot training methodology. "Any word on instructor assignments?" 15 pilots from various bases volunteered for certification training, Rachel replied, including some interesting requests from overseas bases. Apparently, word about our success rates has spread internationally. Alex Kim joined their conversation, his tablet displaying global implementation timelines. "Quinn, we're getting requests from allied nations wanting to observe our training methods. The Canadians want to send a delegation next month, and the Australians are asking about joint training exercises." The scope continued to expand beyond anything Quinn had imagined. Her quiet research project had evolved into a strategic asset, with implications for international military cooperation. "What about Morrison?" Quinn asked quietly. Alex's expression grew serious. "Last I heard, he's adjusting to his new position. Word is that he's actually doing good work in logistics. Apparently, his attention to detail translates well to supply chain management." Quinn nodded. She'd made peace with Morrison's fate. He'd created his own problems through rigid thinking and political favoritism, but she took no pleasure in his downfall. The military was too small a community for personal vendettas. "Captain Rodriguez," a voice interrupted their discussion. Quinn turned to find Ensign David Park, a young pilot, from the latest training cohort. His expression carried the kind of nervous excitement that suggested important news. "What is it, David?" "Ma'am, I just completed my first canyon loop using your protocols. I held 9.2 G for 6 seconds and maintained target lock throughout the entire sequence." His grin was infectious. 6 months ago, I washed out of basic fighter Training because I couldn't handle standard G-force requirements. Your program gave me a second chance at my dream. Quinn felt the familiar warmth that came from watching someone achieve something they'd thought impossible. This was why the long hours of research and development mattered, not for personal recognition, but for moments like this when preparation met opportunity and changed someone's life. Congratulations, David. How did it feel? Like I finally understood what I was capable of, he replied. Like all the training and preparation suddenly made sense. As David walked away to celebrate with his training cohort, Quinn reflected on how much had changed since that morning when she'd watched Morrison's chosen pilots fail the canyon loop one by one. She'd been angry then, frustrated by exclusion and dismissal. Now she understood that her exclusion had been necessary. It had forced her to develop techniques independently without the constraints of existing doctrine. Captain, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes approached with an official-looking document in her hand. I have your new orders. Quinn accepted the papers with curiosity. Ma'am? You're being assigned to the Pentagon's Advanced Training Research Division. Your mission is to identify other areas where current pilot training might be improved through innovative approaches. Essentially, they want you to revolutionize combat aviation training on a systematic level. Quinn scanned the orders, noting the impressive scope of resources and authority she was being granted. Ma'am, this is significant. It's what you've earned, Hayes replied. Your Canyon Loop success demonstrated something military leadership needs to understand. Innovation often comes from unexpected sources. They want to ensure we don't miss the next Quinn Rodriguez because someone in authority can't see past their preconceptions. That evening, Quinn stood alone in the simulator bay after everyone else had gone home. She approached Pod 6 one final time, running her hand along the familiar controls that had been her secret laboratory for months of early morning training sessions. Tomorrow she'd begin the process of transferring to Washington and taking on responsibilities that would affect pilot training across the entire military. The young woman who'd been dismissed as support staff was about to become one of the most influential voices in combat aviation development. But tonight she allowed herself to remember the quiet determination that had sustained her through months of solitary preparation. The Canyon Loop had tested more than her ability to withstand G-forces. It had tested her willingness to persevere when nobody believed in her potential except herself. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Williams. Thanks for giving me a second chance to prove myself. Looking forward to seeing what you accomplish in Washington. More messages followed from pilots throughout the program, expressing gratitude for techniques that had transformed their capabilities and career prospects. Quinn realized that her greatest achievement wasn't mastering the Canyon Loop, it was creating a system that allowed others to master it as well. As she walked out of the simulator bay for the last time, Quinn thought about the young pilots who would follow in her footsteps. Some would face the same exclusion and dismissal she'd experienced. Others would benefit from the more open and merit-based selection criteria her success had helped establish. But all of them would inherit a military culture slightly more willing to listen to quiet voices with revolutionary ideas. They'd train in programs designed to identify and develop human potential rather than simply conforming to traditional expectations. Quinn Rodriguez had started her journey as someone determined to prove she belonged in a world that didn't want her. She ended it as someone who'd changed that world so future generations wouldn't face the same barriers. The Canyon Loop had been her test, but creating a system where excellence could emerge from anywhere, that was her legacy. 6 months later, sitting in her Pentagon office reviewing proposal submissions from bases around the world, Quinn received an email that made her smile. It was from Ensign Sarah Thompson at Edwards Air Force Base, requesting approval to research advanced high-altitude maneuvering techniques that current training protocols couldn't address. The proposal was brilliant, methodical, and completely outside existing doctrine. It reminded Quinn of her own early research, the kind of innovative thinking that emerged when someone refused to accept that impossible was permanent. Quinn approved the proposal immediately and made a note to follow Thompson's progress. The cycle was beginning again, and somewhere in a simulator bay, another quiet voice was preparing to speak loudly enough to change everything. That was exactly how the system was supposed to work, Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that speak through action rather than words. Quinn Rodriguez proved that excellence doesn't require permission, it only requires preparation, meeting opportunity. Her story reminds us that innovation often comes from the people institutional authority overlooks, and that the quiet determination to prove yourself can reshape entire systems. In a world where recognition often goes to the loudest voices, remember the Canyon Loop principle. Sustainable excellence comes from understanding the forces working against you and learning to work with them rather than fighting them directly. Sometimes the best way to break barriers is to become so undeniably competent that the barriers become irrelevant. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.